everybody. Welcome back to, in this encounters with the infamous Submarine. In the last video, I explained to you how we end up getting entangled with the submarine and how she almost sank us, and how Devon peed his pants, and I thought I'm never going to see my mother again, and we had to put out a mayday. It was frightening and a disaster. So now and then the submarine got away from us, and I was worried that we had mortally wounded the submarine. So anyway, I can't remember exactly how many days it was, or maybe a couple of weeks, whatever it may have been, but at one point my dad and I ended up at Art Smart. Now remember Uncle Art, Arthur Ridgway? I told you about this big Viking of a man with this beard, and he was older than my dad, quite a bit older, and he's very soft but intelligent, piercing eyes sticking out of this head of hair, and he drove around in this old beach buggy, but he was a wealthy guy, and he's eccentric, and he owned Art Smart, the second-hand shop in the Strand. In the back room, he had all the fishing equipment, and he said he was sentimental, so he bought it, but he never sold it, and he was just full of shit. But because he was building this thing around himself, this enigma around Art Ridgway, but he was such a cool guy. And every time we got to see, I told you in a previous video, at some point, he used to stand there and say, "In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Mackerel, may we please catch a lot of fish today." And he didn't like catching sharks. He always said he only fished for edibles. Sharks were a waste of time. So in any case, my dad and I are at Art Smart, and that's right. Arthur told my dad that he would make him a hook out of spring steel from a car. So he took the leaf string from a pickup van, an old pickup, and he was very good with his hands, and he shaped this hook, this like a flat bladed hook. If I showed you now, you'd freak out about it. But anyway, he shaped this hook, and we went down to Art Smart and to collect this hook. And while we're sitting there drinking coffee, and him with his rum and coffee, Art said to my dad, "Hey, Theo, by the way, my dad said to him, Art, you've helped me out so much with the original fishing rod and the hook and that. What can I give you?" So Art said, "You know what you can do for me, Theo? Bring me a nice white shark jaw. I don't have one. I've been fishing these waters in False Bay for all these years. I don't have one white shark jaw to put up on my wall. I would like that." So my dad says, "Art, there's two things I don't do. I don't put bait on a man's hook." No, he said three things. I don't put bait on a man's hook. A man does not put bait on my hook. And if a man wants to catch a fish, whether it be a shark or whatever, he gets on my boat and he catches his own goddamn fish." So Art had been out with us a bunch of times. But every time we went to look for great whites, he wasn't interested. He wanted to catch fish. He didn't want to sit out there waiting for great white sharks. So he looks at my dad and he's like, "Okay. All right, deal. I'll come out here to you and waste my time trying to catch a great white shark." So, anyway, I've actually got a photograph of this specific shark I'm going to be talking about. No, not the specific one. That's in the next video, and I'll show you this photograph. So we head out to sea that week and the next weekend, whenever it was. I can't remember. No, I wasn't on the boat. That's right. I was not on the boat. But what happened that day? Now, Arthur had told me about the submarine, and he said that Tuckies had hooked it, and Mace Jones at Stumbo had hooked it, and Donnie Skuman had hooked it. They'd all lost it, and they all said it was over 20 feet long. And my dad and I said to him, "Uncle Arthur, this shark is like 20, it's longer than the boat." And there isn't a shark in this bay that's more than 20 feet long. He was adamant. And he said, "I was on the boat when Tuckies hooked that submarine years ago, and eventually I got bored and I cut the line at 9 o'clock at night, and since then we haven't spoken again." So my dad says, "Well, come on out." we'll catch you a shark, and then you got a jaw. So they head out to sea at some point, and I didn't join that day. And it was, I don't know who was on the boat. I just know my father was on the boat, and Uncle Arthur was on the boat, and there was somebody else on the boat, probably Rodney or Frank, another guy that used to go out fishing with us. So in any case, they get out to Macassar Beach in front of the water tower, 22 meters of water. My father finds the reefs, good reefs, because Arthur apparently is like, I want a good reef, because while we're waiting for that goddamn shark to come along, I want to catch fish. So my dad's like, just hold your horses, hold your goddamn horses, we'll find a reef. So they find a reef, and they get their lines down, and they put enough fish, and Arthur's happy, and he's got his little lunchbox open apparently, because as soon as he hit the water, and the boat stopped, he had his box open, and he liked to snack and catch fish and talk shit. So at some point, and then they baited the shark hook and put it out with a smaller float. My dad put it out with a little float like this, a red rubber float, like a buoy. And of course he wanted to, he didn't always use this drum, only when he was hunting the submarine, but for some reason he wasn't expecting, I suppose just a psych, that he wasn't expecting to hook the submarine, and he wasn't using that massive hook, but he still used that cable, that winch cable, and he made up a few different traces. My dad called them terminal traces. So they put the line out with the baits, and I don't know, a couple of hours later, about a 4-meter great white shark comes to the boat. And a 4-meter great white shark is a big animal. I mean, this is bus. When we encounter 4-meter great white sharks, we call them buses, because their backs are like this, big dorsal fins. It's a serious animal. I mean, a 4-meter great white weigh 1.5, 2 tons, more than a motor car, some motor cars. It's a big animal. And this shark comes around, and everybody's excited, and my dad says, okay, I'll go for it. And he's like, no, I'm not getting into the fighting share. You hook that thing, bring it in. I said I'm coming out on your boat, but I'm not catching that shark. So my dad says, okay, you take the controls, and I'll bring the shark in. So they hook the shark. And with great white sharks, it's a very strange thing. Sometimes you hook a smaller one, like a 3.5 meter one, and you fight it, and it fights like unbelievably strong. It's a very strong fight, and you can battle for 2 or 3 hours trying to get the shark in. And then you'll hook a 4-meter one, and you'll get it in an hour or 45 minutes sometimes. They're all individual. It's different ways they think, and their psyches and their behavior comes into it. We'll get into that with other videos. So anyway, so they hook the shark, the anchor comes up, same thing, you circle around the shark, and you keep the shark inside this battle area, the battleground. And my father's fighting the shark, and he enjoyed that. And they're going, and eventually, probably an hour later or hour and a half later, it wasn't a long fight, they bring the shark to the boat. And Arthur's all excited now. So he lets go of the controls, the engines are in neutral, and my dad's in the fighting chair, but now the swivel has come up to the tip of the rod. So now you've got the 8 meters of cable in the water. So my dad's busy, he's trying to get out of the fighting harness, but Art's already got the cable, and he's pulling the shark in by the cable, and the cable's dropping by his feet, and the shark's coming up, it's exhausted. Then when the shark comes up to the top and his head hits the surface, you put one of the engines into gear, and the boat starts moving forward slowly, because otherwise the shark can come up like that. And what we had developed a system where once the shark's head came up, because wasn't the first or the second shark we had caught, we had caught quite a few now. So the shark's head would come up, and then the boat would slowly go forward, and then the shark would sort of come up next to the boat like that and drift with the boat. Then we had a big loop, a big steel loop attached to an aluminium handle, and we took a rope, and we take little wires and put the rope around, attached it to this big circle, and it would be a lasso. And then once the shark came up next to the boat, one of us would go to the back of the boat and put the loop around the shark's tail, and then you just rip the rope and it just snaps all these little copper cables, and you lasso the shark around the tail, and then you cleat it. You throw the loop down, and then you power forward, and then the shark turns around, and now the shark can do nothing because now you're pulling it backwards to the water, so it can't breathe. Everything's wrong. There's got no power on its tail, and you drag it back to shore like that. And by the time you get to the harbor after 9 miles, the sharks were exhausted, or they were almost dead. They succumbed to stress and the trauma of the whole thing that's taking place. So now they're trying to do this, and my dad's still looking around, and Arthur's busy pulling the shark up. He's got these 8. By that time, we'd actually lengthened the traces, I think, to 10 meters long. So he's pulling this trace up. Yes, we had lengthened them to 10 meters long because what my dad had done, where the float was, he would make several loops. So now, instead of the bait hanging 8 meters below the surface, it would be hanging about 5 meters below the surface, and he'd make hoops in the terminal rig, the cable, and then he'd just put a little wire around it. So when the shark grabbed the bait, it would snap the wire, and then there would be 5 meters of slack cable in the water, which gave the great white shark, time to swallow the bait, which meant you hooked the shark deeper, and you caused more damage, and it was a quicker kill. So that's what happened. So Arthur's now pulling this thing up, and he's got his hands wrapped around the cable, and the shark's exhausted. And while my dad's trying to take his harness off, he looks up over Uncle Art. Now, Uncle Art is looking down, and he's focused on his shark. My dad looks over him, and he sees this huge animal coming up, and the water's clear. And he looks into the water, and he sees the submarine. It's the submarine coming up. And the submarine, he says, the submarine's coming up, and he says it was like a movie. And he says it's coming up like that, and he sees the jaws dropping and open like that. And he knows it's a submarine. He can see it's a submarine. And he shouts to Art, let the cable go, let the cable go, because he can see that the submarine is coming up to grab the shark, the 4-meter shark. Now, 4-meter great white shark is a bus, and the submarine is coming up to take a 4-meter great white shark as live bait. And Arthur's like, what? Turns out, what dear, what are you talking about? And he's still got the cable. And my dad says, for God's sake, drop the fucking cable, just drop it. And Art looks up and he sees the submarine. Now the submarine's just 3 meters away. So he gets a fright and he just drops the cable. And so the 4-meter shark is next to the boat, and it starts wallowing slightly away from the boat like that. And as it wallows away from the boat, my dad says it sort of goes onto its side like that. So the dorsal fin's like this. He says the submarine comes up and hits that shark midships in the middle. Whop! And he says now 4 meters like this. He says that submarine grabs that shark around the side and slightly over the back and bites down onto it. And he remembers clearly that they're looking at this, and the sub holds it like that and just pulls it away. And everybody's silent. And my dad's still strapped into the harness. He hadn't disconnected yet. And the submarine just takes off with this shark. And next thing, the rod bangs sideways because he wasn't concentrating. So now the submarine's going like that, and the rod's facing this way, bangs sideways, almost rips him out the fighting chair. And now the real screaming. So now he's got the 4-meter shark on the line, still hooked, and the submarine's got the 4-meter shark in his mouth. And it's confusion. So now my father's fighting Arthur's shark, the 4-meter shark, and the submarine at the same time. And he says it's not running too far, but it goes down. And he's fighting it like that, and it stops. But he says there's so much pressure on it. All the pressure's on it like that. And he's trying to, he's just trying to get that hoping that the submarine will let go of that 4-meter shark and try and get it back to the boat. That's just a natural reaction. And he says that I don't know how long it was. It was a couple of minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Nobody knows exactly how long. But you can feel the submarine jerking like this, and it's jerking and jerking. And next thing, the water, not far from the boat, like 20 meters or 30 meters or 40 meters from the boat, he says the water just explodes. And the submarine comes out the water like that. Comes out the water like that with the other shark in its mouth. So it's got this 4-meter shark in its mouth. And he says the submarine comes out the water like that with this 4-meter shark in its jaws. And they say, Arthur and my dad said it came up to about a pectoral height. So its head came out the water until its pectorals. And then it fell down like that. And it went down again. And the rod started banging like this. And my dad's and Arthur's theory is that the submarine started ripping this other shark apart. And next thing, the line snapped. Boom. So the theory is that the submarine rolled on the cable and its tail just snapped off the line. And the line snapped. And then the line snapped. And then also that came later. So the line snapped, and my dad reeled in the line, and Arthur was, fuck, my shark's gone. And my dad's like, Jesus. And Arthur says, that was a submarine. And my dad says, yes, it was a sub. And he says, like a minute later, 30 seconds, a minute later, whatever it was, all this white milky stuff started drifting up to the surface, and these decomposed fish and seals and things started drifting up to the surface right there by the boat. So obviously the submarine was ripping this shark to pieces. And then it fed on the shark, and no, that day the float never came up. The float and the cable were gone. The terminal rig were gone. I'm thinking of another time where a shark actually bit the float and took it down and spat it out again and it popped to the surface. So that was gone. That 4-meter shark was gone. The submarine came up. This animal is so enormous that it took another enormous great white shark in its jaws, ripped it down and ripped it to pieces and consumed it, or consumed parts of it, or whatever it may be. And they were just flabbergasted. But anyway, so they continued fishing. My dad didn't have another trace terminal rig on the boat. They fished for a while longer, and then they headed back to shore. And he says that Arthur just couldn't stop talking about it. My God, Theo, the size of that thing. I saw it with tuckies, but I didn't see it close. It just took the bait, and we just saw the markings on it, and the chunk out of the dorsal fin, but that thing's bigger than the boat. And he's like saying to my dad, and my dad says, yeah, I told you, Arthur. I told you that thing's 7 meters long. And he says, maybe it's even bigger. That thing's like 23 feet, 24 feet long. And my dad says, I told you. And anyway, they get to the harbor, and I'm not there, but apparently and Arthur was this loud guy. So they pull in into the harbor, and no matter who would listen, and every time Katana had become notorious and very famous by then. So every time Katana came into the harbor, it always drew a crowd, because Katana was always in the newspapers, anti-submarine warfare in False Bay, Theo's hunting the submarine again, and that kind of thing. And they come into the harbor, and Arthur's shouting to anybody who's got a set of ears on it, you should have seen what we saw out there today. You would never believe it. We saw the goddamn submarine, and that thing is at least 23, maybe 24 feet long. And you're not going to believe it. It took a 4-meter great white shark off our line. It took a 4-meter great white shark as live bait and took it away from us. You won't believe what we saw out on the water that day. And of course, when my dad got home and they came back with the boat, and Arthur, sorted everything out, they told me the story, and I was like, wow, that's incredible. So that was the end of our encounters, my father's encounters with the submarine. He never saw it again after that. But in the last video I was talking to you about, and I'm going to mention it now, so you got it, that tape recorder and the photographs that I had taken. And I had taken maybe 20 or 25 photographs of the submarine, and most of it was splashing, but there were a few photographs of this animal. And before this particular event, my father got a phone call from a film producer called Peter Elliott, and he said he wanted to make a movie with my father. So he came to the house, and we were sitting around the table, and my dad was a great storyteller. So he was telling Peter everything about the submarine and about it, when we were attacked by her and we were attacking her and we almost got killed. And during the conversation, my dad says, "No, I've got this tape, and on this tape you hear everything. You hear the drama, you hear the panic, you hear Devon screaming, and you hear Devon saying he's wetting himself, and you hear the smashing and the thumping, and everything is on this tape. And I've got the photographs and the line in my room." And my dad just mentions to Peter, "Oh, my son here, Craig, he actually recorded it on a cassette, and he's got some photographs." And Peter Elliott's like, "Really?" My dad says, "Yeah, Craig, young man, go." My dad says to me, go fetch it. So I go to the room, I bring the tape recorder and the tape and the photographs, I give it to Peter, and he's like, "Oh my God, this is the submarine?" And my dad says, "Yeah, it's a submarine." And he says, I don't know these sharks got so big. This is unbelievable." And my dad says, "Yeah, that's a submarine. Craig took the pictures." And Elliot looks at me and he says, "You took these pictures?" I said, "Yeah, I took them." And then my dad says to me, "Play the tape." So I rewind it to the beginning, I push play, and I don't know, 2 cups of coffee later, we sit there, and every time you listen to this, it was mesmerizing. And Peter Elliott, his jaw was hanging open, and he was listening to every word, and he was just like shaking his head. And at the end of it, he said to my dad, he said, "Do you know what you got here? This is there's nothing like this in the world. Nothing." And he says to my dad, "Do you mind if I take it and I have copies made of the photographs and a copy made of the tape, and I'll get it back to you?" And you know where this is going. My dad, in his wisdom, says, "Sure, just make a copy and bring it back." My God, that tape would be worth $1 million plus today. Those photographs would be worth, as collectibles, $1 million plus. I shit you not. National Geographic and Discovery Channel searched for them. I think Discovery Channel actually hired, through a producer friend of mine, Mark Marks. He makes the most beautiful films. And they hired an investigator to track down Peter Elliott, but they could never. He had passed away. And that history, that pure, real history was lost forever. And what a tribute that would have been to the submarine. And it makes me sad, actually. It makes me sad because it would have been a tribute to the submarine, but also it would have been $2 million in my pocket. Anyway, so that was the last time we saw the submarine. Now the next video I'm going to make is the end of this particular series as a box. So it's like 6 videos in the series. And the next video, I'm not going to tell you about the other sharks we caught. It's the last great white shark we ever caught. And it was the turning point where we stopped hunting great white sharks. And I've actually got a photograph of this particular great white shark that I'm talking about. And Ryan Johnson, who I work with, he actually edits he's so good at editing his videos. He will put it into the video at some point where he thinks it's the right point to put it in, and you'll actually see that specific shark that changed the history in South Africa, where my father went from great white shark hunter to great white shark protector. That was the start of it, and was the last great white shark we ever caught. Thank goodness. But at least we knew the submarine was still alive. We've never seen her again. So yeah, wait for the next one.